Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're going to be doing part 181. Gee, that's a lot. Of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people be making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today, if you guys are a big fan of Great Cakes mod, you're in luck because Great Cakes mods is made every mod in this video. So I said it would happen eventually, but we've reached the time where it's just going to be everyone in this episode is made by Great Cakes mod. And also for you bird lovers, we have quite a few birds today, especially some vultures. So I'm really excited to talk about them. So we've got plenty of birds, but we're going to be starting off with an extinct mammal, again done by Great Cakes mods. We're having a look at a prehistoric horse. This is Hippotherium primigenus. I don't know what's up with that one. We'll swap to one that isn't got that bug. You're looking fine. So Hippotherium. So hippo means horse in Greek. So basically horse. Sorry about that. Basically just means horse tooth. Is the best way to put it. So these are an extinct genus of horse that lived from the Miocene into the Pliocene, from about 13 to about 6 million years ago. And the last known living species was Hippotherium mapasi, which is found in Italy. These guys are the type species, or the species that the genus is based on, Primogenus. So these guys are known from the Miocene, so they're found in Europe as well, so from the Miocene, in southern Germany as well, and the Middle East, while the other species such as Celticanum and Cosawaldi are found in Miocene deposits in Spain. There's also the Asian Hippotherium that was found in northern China, that is also, or Hippotherium kind of group, was actually put in this genus. So they're not too drastically different from modern horses until you look at those toes of theirs. So you can see one of the biggest thing about horse evolution was all the 5 toes going into one massive toe, because horses walk around basically on a single toe. And you can see Hippotherium was kind of well on the way to that. The not the earliest relatives like Eohippus and things like that all had like 4 or 5 digits. You can see this is starting to shrink. So you can see those 2 digits on the side there, and this kind of big hoof that you see that's very typical of horses. So that's really cool, almost like in a transitional form. See, that's really quite cool. See, I could go into Ansel, but I can't really bother. But you can get a good look at there. You can have a look at the toes there, which is quite cool. And I like the colours on it too. I really like seeing this extinct species. So let's have a look at the Zoopedia and see if we can find some more information. So the Hipponarians is like a group of Hipparionarians, so a group of horses that include, the species. So it's like the family. So kind of like 3-toed horses is probably like the best way to describe it. Yeah, as a family of 3-toed horses. So the smallest species is Hipparion picaniformis, which actually only had a body mass of 23 kilograms, or 51 pounds. Which is quite a bit smaller, than modern horses, which can get up to about over 300 kilograms. In North America, they were equally as diverse to equines during the Middle Miocene, but overtook them in species richness during the Late Miocene to Pliocene. At the end of the Hemophilia Hipparons, they severely declined in diversity. The last known species, as I mentioned that before, genus feeder. So, unlike modern horses, which are pretty much just considered grazers, these guys were a little bit more generalist and able to feed on browse and grass. So that's quite cool. And we also have to look over here is these little cuties. Look at that little guy. Look at the little foal. Very, very adorable. Yeah, another really great mod. I'm not going to keep going saying this is made by Great Case Mod, because they're all made by Great Case Mods, so that's the last time I'm saying it. Next up, we're going to have a look at some vultures. We love some vultures, so here we've got the Egyptian vulture. So let's have a look at these guys. They're also known as the white scavenger, or the Pharaoh's chicken. So these guys are a small old world vulture in the monotypic genus Nephoron, and they are found in the Iberian Peninsula, North Africa, West Asia, and India. Their contrasting underwing patterns and wedged-shaped tail makes it distinctive in flight as it soars on thermals. This car going past. Egypt vultures typically soar on thermals in the warmer parts of the day, and they're quite generous. They feed mainly on carrion, but prey on small mammals, birds, and reptiles, and the eggs of other birds. And we'll get into them. They actually use tools, as we'll get into that. So we'll talk a little bit of taxonomy. So they were formally described by Carl Linnaeus in 1785 as Vulture peniceptilus, but there was also a few prehistoric species as well, which is a member of the same genus, but there's a few extinct species, and then they've been also moved around. So there's like Lolus, which is from Spain in the late Miocene. And their nearest closest relatives are the bearded vulture and the palmer vulture. So those are their closest living relatives, even though they're different genera. And there's three widely described subspecies. There's kind of the Egyptian one, kind of the African one, and the Indian one, and the Central Asian one. So yeah, they're kind of split into subspecies. Not exactly how true they are, but I don't think this is meant to be any type of subspecies describing it, but whatever. In terms of its plumage, you can see its plumage is completely white with black feathers on its wings, with wild birds usually appearing soiled with a rusty or brown shade to the white plumage that comes from mud or iron-rich soil. Captive specimens without access to soil have that really clear white plumage. It's also been suspected as a case of cosmic coloration. And you can see they've got quite a slender bill, along at the tipping of the mandible. Neck feathers are long and form a hackle, so it kind of, make almost like a funny crown there, which is quite interesting. They have pointed wings, with the third primary being the longest. The tails are also wedge-shaped, and the legs are pink in adults and grey in juveniles. And their claws, you can see, are long and straight, and the third and fourth toes are slightly webbed at the base. The bill as well in the dominant subspecies is pale and yellowish in adults, while the smaller Indian subspecies, it varies a little bit. The sexes are pretty much the same in colour, but the males have a deep orange facial skin colour compared to females, and females are average about 10 to 15% heavier than males. So the average size for a Egyptian vulture, is about 47 to 65 centimetres or 9 to 26 inches from the point of the beak and the tail feathers, and subspecies can be smaller. Their wingspan is about 2.7 times their body length, so they're about 1.5 meters, and they weigh between 1.9 to 2.4 kilograms, and they're actually one of the smallest true Old World vultures. Only smaller species are the marginally lighter palm-nut vulture. So they're actually pretty small compared to most vultures. So as I mentioned as well, they can be found across the Old World, so they can be found from Southern Europe to Northern Africa and all through Africa, and then into Southeast Asia and India, and rare vagrants in Sri Lanka. They mostly live in the subtropical zone of Europe and migrate south to Africa in the winter. Vagrants may actually appear as far as South Africa, and they nest mainly on rocks and cliffs. And like many other large soaring migrants, they tend to avoid soaring over large groups of water, so they tend to hang out around the Levant and things like that. In terms of its behaviour ecology, they tend to usually be seen singly and in pairs, soaring on thermals, much like other species of vulture. They feed on a range of food, including mammal feces, insects and dung, carrion, vegetable material, and sometimes small animals. And they're the only Old World vulture that actually regularly feeds on feces, which is interesting. And the carotenoids that they absorb from that, it kind of is really important for their bright coloration on their face. When they join other vulture species at a dead animal, they tend to hang back and then let other big ones like Griffon vultures kind of take over. And wild rabbits also form a pretty significant part of their diet. And landfills is also important as well. And they also eat ungulate feces and things like that, so they are pretty generalist in what they can eat. They are mostly silent birds, but they can make high-pitched mewing or hissing noises. In the nest, screeching, noises when squabbling at a carcass. Young birds can also be seen hissing. And in terms of roosting, they actually tend to roost communally in large trees, buildings, or cliffs. And roost sites are usually close to a foraging area or dump site. And in Spain and Morocco, they can be found mainly by immature birds. They tend to roost on things like large dead pines, and the number of adults in the roost kind of increases till June. And it's thought that breeding adults are able to forage more efficiently, enjoying the roost and following others at the breeding area. Breeding birds that fail to raise young may also join the non-breeding birds to roost during June. And allopreening, or preening of other individuals, has been seen before. It's between mated pairs and individuals that are unrelated, and particularly females, which is quite interesting. So in the breeding season is in spring, and during the breeding season, courting pairs will soar high together, and one or both may take steep swirling or swooping dives. The birds are monogamous, and they pair bond may be maintained for more than one breeding season, and the same nest type may be used each year. The nest is an untidy platform of twigs, made on a cliff ledge, building, or the fork of a large tree, and old nest platforms that eagles may be taken over, which is quite cool. An extra pair copulation with neighbouring kind of bird pairs has been recorded before, and it may be a reason for adult males to stay close to the female before and after the egg-laying period to ensure that's theirs. Females might also sometimes associate with two males, and all three help with raising the brood. The typical clutch consists of 2 eggs, which are incubated in turn by both parents, and the eggs are brick red with a broad end covering most densely in blotches of red and brown and black. The parents begin incubating soon after the first egg is laid, and the first egg hatches about 42 days. The second chick may hatch 3 to 5 days later, and there's a longer delay increase in the likelihood that they may die of starvation. In cliffs where there are nests located close to each other, young birds have been known to clamber onto neighbouring nests to obtain food. And in Spain, young fledglings leave the nest about 90 to 110 days. Fledgling continues to remain dependent on their parent for at least a month, and once the bird is ready to forage on its own, they move away from their parent's territory and have been seen flying about 500 kilometres away from their nest site. 1-year-old European birds migrate to Africa and stay there for at least 1 year. The vulture that fledged in France stayed in Africa for 3 years before migrating north in spring. After migrating back to these breeding areas, they kind of search for good feeding territories and cool mates. The first adult plumage is attained about the 4th to 5th year, and they've been known to live for about 37 years in captivity and at least 21 in the wild. And the probability of survival varies with age, increasing till about the age of 2 and then falling after the age of 5, with older birds having about an annual survival rate probability of 0.75 for non-breeders, 0.83 for breeders. So what's really cool is the nominate population in Africa have been known to use stones as tools, and with large eggs, similar to that of an ostrich or a bustard, they'll actually use a large pebble to kind of crush it, and they actually prefer using rounded pebbles and jagged rocks. And this behaviour was first recorded by Jane Goodall in 1966, but it has not been recorded in other subspecies, so it seems like these guys might have learned it. And the ability to use ostrich eggs to utilise it by brown-necked ravens, which form groups, is actually a great example of collective parasitism. And they have been known to use tool use, which is quite cool in this species. So in terms of their conservation status, they are considered endangered, as we'll get into, which is really, really sad, of course. So, healthy adults do not have many predators, but human activities do pose threats. Collision with power lines, hunting, intentional poisoning, lead accumulation, and insect-sting gunshots and carcasses, and pesticide accumulation has taken a big toll on their population. They have declined sadly in most of their range. In India, they're believed to have declined to 35% since 1999. In some areas, there's only believed to be about 12 to 15,000 of them. In Italy, the numbers actually declined from 30 to 9 from the 1970s and 1990s, and they actually believed that about 50% of the European population would have died from lead poisoning, so that's a really big worry. And the population of the Canary Islands has been isolated for a long time, and it is declining as well, and is restricted to only about 130 individuals. And in order to provide safe food and stuff, attempts have been made to make vulture restaurants where carcasses are made available that are safe. However, the intentions may actually encourage other opportunistic predators and scavengers to concentrate at the site and pose a threat to the vultures nesting near the vicinity. But luckily, there has been some great conservation efforts that have been implemented to protect them. Let's see if we can actually... Yeah, they tend to hang out a bit too high. There's been efforts to help them along... their migration routes, including monitoring, nest guarding, supplementary feeding, insulating hazardous electric power lines, and removing poison baits on carcasses with trained dogs. And this has helped increase the populations. There are people trying to help them out. As I mentioned, they are quite an interesting animal in culture. They've been mentioned in the Bible, And in ancient Egypt, they were considered, like a symbol. So they were in the hieroglyphs. They obviously stood for something. So that's quite cool. But yeah, another cool little species. Definitely a big fan of these little guys. So yeah, we'll carry on. We've got another vulture today. We have got another species. We've gone to a bigger species. So this is the Cinereous vulture, also known as the black vulture, the monk vulture, or the black vulture. I'll just call it the black vulture for the moment. So they're actually one of the largest birds of prey and play quite a huge role in the ecosystem, very similar to other vultures, as we get into. So the genus name is Aeptus monarchus. So it's the Greek word for alien, which means halfway between vulture and eagle. And monarchus, means like a monk crown. And they also get, because they got that bald head and, rough there, almost looks like a monk's crown. So it's like a monarchus, so it is monk. They're quite a big bird. They measure about 98 to 120 centimeters, or 36 to 47 inches in total length, and have a 2.5 to 3.1 meter, about 8.2 to 10 foot 2 inch wingspan, which is quite big. Males can weigh between 6.3 to 11 kilograms, or 14 to 25 pounds, where females can weigh between 7.5 and 14 kilograms, about 17 to 31 pounds. And this actually makes them one of the heaviest flying birds, which is quite interesting. However, in a Korean study, they did a large study where they found an average about 9.6 kilograms. Unlike most species of like raptors and things, males can actually broader overlap with size with females, although not uncommonly the females may be slightly heavier. They are one of the two largest extant vulture species. They actually seem to be tied with the Himalayan vulture in their proportions. And they can be slightly larger, or kind of appear the similar wingspan to like the Californian and Andean condors, which is quite cool. As you can see as well, they're kind of like a distant dark grey, and the whole body is brown except for the pale on their heads there. We'll get a little bit of a closer look. This down is absent in the closely related lappet face vulture, and the skin and head are like a bluish grey. The dots have brown eyes, and the primary quills are often black. From a distance, they do appear all black. And this massive bill is quite big. It's actually the largest of any living kind of bird of prey. The feet are feature enhanced by the small size of the skull. So they just got a huge beak and a small skull, which is quite cool. And their bill length can get up to about 10 centimeters, or about 3 inches. Let's have a look at this one perched up here. Looks really nice. It's quite cool. And he flies down the moment I move. Of course he does. But anyway, we'll talk about these guys. So this is another Eurasian species of vulture. Let's have a look. So this is a Eurasian species. Their western limits is Spain and inland Portugal, with a reintroduced population in southern France. And they're found just conjointly beyond Greece, Turkey, into the Middle East. And they spread all the way to Central Asia and northern India. And they can be found in like Mongolia and Korea. Their range is fragmented throughout the range in Europe, and are generally a permanent resident, except for those part of the range where it gets harsh winters. And they tend to be a bird that prefers hilly, mountainous areas, like dry, semi-open habitats as well, like meadows. And they usually nest only occurs near the tree line in the mountains. They're typically all associated with undisturbed remote areas with limited human disturbance, and they can be found in carcasses in all sorts of different types of terrain. And in the current range in the Caucasus in the Middle East, they've been known to fly, found in about 100 to 2,000 meters in elevation, where they are typically found in higher elevations in Asia, which is quite cool. In terms of the behavior, they're quite a large solitary bird, and can be found alone and in pairs, very similar to other species as well, and they kind of congregate around feeding sites. They can be up to about 40 vultures. So in terms of breeding, we'll actually have a look at the little baby while we talk about the breeding, because these little babies are adorable. So in Europe, these vultures return to the nesting grounds in January to February. In Spain and Algeria, they start breeding in around February and March. In northwestern Asia, February to April, and in northeastern India is January, and Turkmenistan is January. So depends on where they are in the world. They breed in loose colonies, with nests really being found in the same tree or rock formation, unlike other old world vultures that often nest in tight-knit colonies, so they tend to do that differently. Their nests tend to be about 300 meters or to 2 kilometers apart from each other. They also breed in high mountains and large forests, nesting in trees and occasionally cliff ledges. The breeding season lasts from February until September-October. The most common displays is that they have synchronized flight movements. However, flight play between pairs and juveniles is not unusual, as they interlock talons and spiral down from the sky. They have a huge nest that's about 1.45 to 2 meters and about 1 to 3 meters across. And their nests increase in size as a pair, usually repeatedly over the years as they cover it with dung and animal skin. And the nest can range from, 1.5 to 12 meters high in a tree, and they prefer trees like wild pear, almond, pine trees, oak, and juniper. And most of the time, most nesting they can be found along cliffs. In a few cases, they've been known to reportedly nest directly on cliffs. And the eggs are typically a white or pale buff base colour with overlined with red. And they measure about 83.4 to 104 millimeters in height. And about 55 to 76 millimeters, or about 2 to 3 inches in width. Width, yeah. The incubation's about 50 to 62 days, averaging about 50 to 56 days in April or May in Europe. That's when they'll hatch. The young are covered in greyish white or greyish brown coloured down, which becomes paler with age. The first feathers start growing in the sockets about 30 days, and then they completely lose their fledge at about 60 days. The parents feed their young by regurgitating, and an active nest are very foul and stinky. Weights in nestlings in Mongolia increase from as little as about 2 kilograms. And then when they're about a month old in early June, slightly more massive than their parents, about 16 kilograms. And the nesting success is actually quite high. About 90% of eggs hatch, and then more than half of the yelling birds make it to adulthood, as they are devoted parents. But these eggs can fall prey to things like palace cats, common ravens, grey wolves, also can be nest predators and foxes. As well, there's other types of eagles like these imperial eagle or golden eagles or eagle owls that have been known to take nestlings or take even adults sometimes. But typically they can live up to about 39 years, though 20 years is probably more common. So they are a little bit more of a longer-lived bird, which is quite cool. And since adults don't have any regular predators. In terms of feeding, though, they eat mostly carrion. They'll pretty much eat any type of carrion they can find, from the largest mammals to fish and reptiles. They'll eat, yak carcasses, kiang carcasses, marmot carcasses, even human carcasses. But they've also been seen preying on rabbits and things like that. Bigger things they'll scavenge, and then they have dietary preferences. They'll just pretty much scavenge on anything. In terms of their status of conservation, though, they sadly, vultures as a whole are very, very endangered. These guys are considered near threatened, so they're actually doing relatively okay. But vultures are, as a group, are very much, vilified and, they have issues. So they've declined over most of their range due to poisoning, by eating poison bait put out to kill dogs and other predators, and higher hygiene standards reducing the amount of carrion. Vultures of all species, although not the target of poisoning operations, may be shot or on sight by locals. In some places it's prevalent to trap them. Nests also relatively easy to access and often will be compromised for eggs or firewood. And the decline has been the greatest on the western half of their range in Europe, and they have gone extinct in a few European countries, which is a bit sad. But Turkey actually holds the second largest population of the species in the western Palearctic. And their populations believed to be about 1,000 pairs, and the worldwide population estimated to be about 4,500 to 5,000 pairs, with the most recent population estimates in 2017 estimates that the population is about 10,000 breeding pairs, between 7, 8, 10,000, and roughly equates to about 15 to 21,000 mature individuals. So they are doing okay, but they are still, as I mentioned, at risk of extinction, like most vultures, as they face those kind of same issues, which is real sad. But yeah, that is the black vulture. Next up, we've got another vulture we've kind of talked about a little bit. We have got the Eurasian Griffon vulture, which is called the Griffon vulture in the game. So let's have a look at these guys. Real cuties, I think. I wonder if he had the babies. Yeah, we should have babies. Yeah. So the European Griffon vulture, or Griff's fulvus. These guys are a large old world vulture, also known as the Griffon vulture. They are not to be confused with the Pal's vulture or the Himalayan vulture, and they're closely related to the white-backed vulture. So in terms of their description, they're about 93 to 122 centimeters, or about 37 to 48 inches long, with about 2.3 to 2.8 meter wingspan, or about 7 to 9 feet. Nominate race, the males weigh between 6.2 to 10.5 kilograms, and the females weigh about the same. While the Indian subspecies, they are a little smaller, with extreme adult weights getting about 15 kilograms. Like the weight attained in captivity being a bit fatter. They are typically, not too different from most of the old world vultures in appearance, with a white head, broader wings, and short tail feathers. They have a white neck and a rough and yellow bill, and their body, you can see, has got those quite dark light flight feathers and things like that. So in terms of the habitat, they actually in Italy, they've only survived in the island of Sardinia, where there's also been recent attempts to actually reintroduce them onto the peninsula, and there's been several specimens found, and it seems to be actually working. In places, in Europe, as I mentioned, there are some small populations. Israel, they're doing okay. In Greece, there's about 1,000 Griffon vultures. They've been reintroduced to other places as well. In most places in Europe, there's like a few small populations, mainly because of things, as I mentioned, like poisoning, things like that. But they are doing okay in most of their range, other than maybe Europe, where there's a lot of reintroductions happening. Like other vultures, they're a scavenger. They feed mainly on carcasses and things like that, and they soar over to find them. The maximum life expectancy is about 41 years for an individual in captivity. They breed in crags and mountains in Europe, North Africa, and Asia, and they lay only one egg. So let's see if we can find the baby while we talk about that. They lay only one egg. There's a juvenile. So as I mentioned, they can barely tell the difference. Yeah, they lay only one egg. Their population is mostly resident, and density dependence on this colonial species has actually impacted the success. So they tend to like to breed in protected locations like caves or ledges with other birds, being colonial. What's really cool as well, these guys are actually considered model organisms as they study, soaring and thermoregulation. The energy costs of level flight has been high and providing alternatives to flapping their wings. So they soar, catching thermals, things like that. And they elevate their body rate to up to 16 times their basal metabolic rate in flight, which is quite cool. And as well as scavengers, they have not been observed to seek shelter for thermoregulation. Their bald head helps thermoregulate themselves in hot and cool temperatures. Changes of posture can change bare skin exposure from 7 to 32%, so they're quite good at doing that as well. And they, in terms of intraspecific competition, they don't show any age differences. The tuning rates tend to increase when food's available. Studies connected with the reintroduction actually found that older adults are more inclined to display aggressive behavior and signs of dominance, though the sexes have no difference. And as I mentioned, the same issue that impacts most vultures around the world is poison baits, because people try to put poison out, to kill lions and other wolves and things like that. But it turns out vultures are particularly like them, and they know that impacts them. So that's really, really sad. But yeah, that pretty much covers the Griffon vulture. They're not too different from your typical, blackhead vulture, things like that. They haven't really used any of these yet, but I'm sure they would. But yeah, really, really cool. Another cool species to talk about. So next up, we're going to talk about the pack that Great Cakes Mod has made a little Christmas pack. They've all been released separately now, but we've got another really cool bird. As I mentioned, birds are dominating the pack today. So we have got the rock ptarmigan as well, or Lycobus muta. So these guys are a medium-sized game bird in the grouse family, also known as the ptarmigan. They are the official bird of Canada, and they are the official game bird known from Labrador and Newfoundland, and they are found in Japan. They're also called the thunderbird, and they're actually a protected species. The rock ptarmigan is about 34 to 36 centimeters, about 13 to 14 inches long, and have an 8 centimeter tail, or 3-inch tail, and a wingspan about 54 to 60 centimeters, or about 21 to 24 inches, and about 450 and 640 grams, and it's smaller than the willow ptarmigan. So they are seasonally camouflaged, so the feathers molt, so this is the winter plumage. So their feathers molt from white in winter and become brown in the summer. So you can see this one's kind of a lot more brown, but you can see there's still a little bit of that plumage there, and it's a little bit more intermittent. So it's kind of like a variety, and it's cool that the variety was added to the game. In winter, the plumage comes completely white except for the black hour tail feathers, and then the males have some red around their eyes. They can be distinguished from the winter willow ptarmigan by habitat and markings, as these guys prefer higher elevations and more barren environments. So in terms of sounds display, these guys actually evoke a lot of guttural sounds and rattles, and they use them on leks. So leks are where a bunch of males go to display to try and find females. So single or multiple males carry out these displays in a lek, waiting for someone to, catch their eye. Aerial combat also involves fast forward flight, rapid wing beating and kind of kicking out at each other and rasping at each other to fight each other. And on the ground, they defend their space by calling and giving chase to other males. And physical conflicts between territorial males rarely occur, but that does happen. They'll often fan their tail, extend their necks, and kind of lower their wings and circle a receptive female in their vicinity. In terms of the distribution, they have quite a wide distribution. They're a sedentary species, so they are only really found in areas they don't really migrate much. Across Antarctica and the subantarctic Eurasia, and also North America, which includes Greenland. They live in rocky mountainsides and tundra. They've been widespread and can be found from Norway, Sweden, Scotland, the Pyrenees, the Alps, Bulgaria, the Urals, the Adelaide Mountains, and into Japan. And then they can be found, Alaska, Canada, northern Canada, places like that. And they've also been introduced to New Zealand, South Georgia, the Kelugan Islands, and the Corset Islands. And there's a small population living in Franz Josef Land and the Eurasian High Arctic, which is quite interesting. And they were far more widespread during the Ice Age, which is not surprising. So in terms of feeding, they actually vary tremendously on the region of their distribution. So in Alaska, they'll eat aspen buds, dwarf birch, and willow as a staple winter diet. And then they transition their diets to lindenberries and crowberries during the summer. And then they feed on willow berries, around that as well. And breeding, apart from the red-eye cones, male rock ptarmigans, this is a female. The males have as I mentioned, that distinctive comb there. So this is pretty much a male and nearly his colours, summer colours. So it is in grouse as well. The variation of comb size and things like that exists between species, and the comb is usually used for display. Many studies also show a strong correlation between comb size and level of testosterone, which is quite interesting. The male's comb has been focus of studies regarding sexual selection, so that seems to be related to them, and there seems to be mating systems among males who are influenced by comb size, and bigamous males who had larger combs than monogamous males, which is quite interesting. And in terms of the babies, we look at the cute little babies. So these babies reach sexual maturity in about 6 months, and they commonly have about 6 chicks once they have babies. And because of the high breeding rate, their actually population is not too affected by things like hunting. So they're actually still quite a common species, which is really cool. So in terms of energy storage and assimilation, what's really cool is they have limited capacity for fat storage, which means they have to forage through the winter. They can't, hibernate. Most of this minuscule mass gained over the winter is in the ovary, oviduct, and hypertrophy, or muscles, in preparation for the spring breeding season. They maximize assimilation of nutrient-poor foods. Sorry about that. Through their enlarged seeker, and this metabolic requirements can be partly supplemented by fermentation. And there's actually a subspecies in Svalbard which actually exhibits a significant seasonal mass gains. They do get fatty deposits as well. And in terms of culture, they're actually a popular meal in festive meals in Icelandic cuisine. Though hunting was banned in Iceland from 2003 to 2024, but has resumed again. And it's obviously restricted to selected days, which is quite cool. But yeah, I do love a rock ptarmigan. Really, really cool. Cool to see some more birds and stuff. There's so many birds in the world, It's really awesome to get a variety of them. And we're not done with birds yet. We still have one more bird. So this is the next part of the Christmas pack that she released. We have got the snowy owl. So that's a really famous one. So the snowy owl, or Bubo scedanus, also known as the polar owl, the white owl, or the Arctic owl. These guys are a large owl in the true owl family. They are native to the Arctic regions of both North America and the Paleoarctic, breeding mostly in the tundra. They're also one of the largest species of owl, and the only owl with a mainly white plumage. So that's quite cool. In terms of taxonomy, they were named by Carl Linnaeus, as I mentioned, as Strix scedonia, but then they were put in their own genus of Bubo, as well, as they seem to be more closely related to the horn owls, which is quite interesting. Fossil history is actually fairly well documented, and you're looking at them, they actually were much more common, found much more south during the Ice Age, which is not surprising. And we do have some from, like England, France, Germany, Spain, and even the Americas in Illinois, which is quite cool. And there has been some evidence of hybrids. They're not known to interbreed with other species, as there's not been cited. However, there's someone bred hybrids of a male snowy owl and a female eagle owl, Eurasian eagle owl. And this one had ear tufts, kind of general size, orange eyes, so kind of a mix of features, of course. But yeah, the snowy owl, as I mentioned, it is mostly white. It's actually purer white than any predatory mammal, like polar bears and Arctic foxes. Often in the field, they often look like a pale rock or lump of snow on the ground. And they like ear tufts, but have very short vestigial tufts that can be erected. The ear tufts measure about 20 to 25 millimeters and has about 10 small feathers. And you can see they've also got that facial disc, like most owls have, that allow them to hear better. It's a very common adaptation. But yeah, they're mostly, they range, they have these little black tips to their feathers, but pretty much they're mostly white. And they've got very fuzzy legs, as you can see there. The chicks, though, they start out grey, as you can see. Their down is quite grey, and they're very much quite fluffy, which helps, keep them nice and warm. But then then it helps them camouflage into the lichens on the ground in the tundra, and then they kind of become, as I mentioned, a little bit more white as they kind of grow up. And as I mentioned, they are a very large species of owl. They are actually the largest species of owl in the high Arctic, or the largest avian predator, and one of the largest owls in the world. They're actually considered I'm glad that they appeal, but they're actually considered the 6th or 7th largest owl species, heaviest, and about the 5th longest and the 3rd longest winged. This species is the heaviest and longest winged in North America, and is second to other few species found in Asia. They are kind of, tied with the great horned owl and, the great grey owl. It's kind of their kind of relatives. And they show actually sexual dimorphism, as the females are larger than the males, which is interesting. And males have been known to measure about 52 to 64 centimeters, about 20 to 25 inches total length. And they have a main span that's about 70 centimeters. The wingspan, males, is about 116 to 165, or about 3 to 5 feet wingspan for males. Female wingspan's a little bit longer, so about 4.96 feet, or about 146 to 83 centimeters for females. And they can get a little bit bigger. Body masses for males are a little bit smaller. They can just get 1.4 to 1.8 kilograms. And then females, as I mentioned, a little bit bigger. They can get about 2.4 kilograms. So they do get a little bit bigger, as I mentioned. And in terms of vocalizations as well, they actually differ a lot in calls. They make just like a barking quality, much more of a hooting sound, which is quite interesting. And their calls can be heard very far through the thin air of the Arctic, up to about more 3 kilometers, or maybe even as much as 10 kilometers. So it's a great way for them to communicate and things like that. And when they're little babies, they do those kind of barks and things, to try and get their parents' attention. But yeah, we'll carry on with their habitat. So the snowy owl typically is found in northern polar areas, higher than the 60th latitude. They are partly nomadic because their populations fluctuate, but they've been known to breed a little bit more southern latitudes. Between 1966 and 67 and 1975, they've actually been found in the Shetlands of Scotland, and are found in quite isolated areas. They also range across much of Russia and in North America. They can be found in the Arctic archipelago, Yukon, places like that, with their regular wintering range being like Siberia, things like that, British Columbia, Labrador. And there have been some ranges. The range does change a little bit with large winters. So there's sometimes larger winter interruptions in temperate latitudes. Actually means migrants will come down. So they have been recorded as low as Tennessee, which is quite interesting, in Texas and Utah and even Hawaii. So there's been one seen in Hawaii, which is very interesting. So their habitat is actually one of the best known inhabitants of the tundra of the Arctic, where there's only moss and lichens and rocks. They also like outcrops and deposits. They also like coastal areas as breeding sites, like meadows, extensive grasslands, and rather scrubby. So pretty much just any open areas they like, which is quite cool. In terms of their behaviour, they are active somewhat during the day, both day and dusk, and at night. They also seem to be active even during the very brief winter daytime in the northern winter. And during the Arctic summer, snowy owls actually tend to peak their activity during twilight, as the darkest time available for nightfall, which is quite interesting. So they are a little bit more, They actually will eat about 7 rodents a day to survive. That cold winter's day, and they have been. They actually have a second thermal conduction. It's the second lowest, only after the Adelie penguin, and is rivaled by the best insulated mammals. So they're very, very insulated, and they tend to perch only mainly when hunting. So they will perch on like radio towers and things like that as well, which is quite cool. They also tend to loaf, which is quite cute. They will fight with conpacifics as well during all seasons. They're very defensive, which is quite interesting as well. And they are partial yet irregular migrants, so they will move farther south during winter, as older owls kind of move south than females of equivalent ages. So there is a little bit of variety there. They even come down the Great Plains, as I mentioned, and things like that. And so hunting techniques, they hunt, as I mentioned, nearly all the time, and they hunt during a theoretical nightfall. So they have strong stomach juices, so they will swallow smaller prey, but sometimes they will tear up larger prey with their claws, and they'll often remove the head, while the larger muscles like the humerus or breast will be eaten first, which is quite interesting. And when hunting, they will hover in a style reminiscent to ospreys, and they'll actually just come down with their claws and then grab their prey. And they've also been known to capture night migrating passerines and shorebirds on the wing, and they've been known to scare other birds off their prey, which is also quite interesting. Their prey spectrum can range, so mostly they'll eat off lemmings, but they'll eat rodents of their similar size. They'll also eat passerines, seabirds, ptarmigan, and ducks, among all sorts of things like amphibians and beetles and crustaceans, so they are pretty generous in that regard. The summer diet is closely tied to the lemmings, so they eat mostly lemmings, but of course they will eat other things when they get the opportunity. Some areas where lemmings are absent, they will eat a lot of hatchlings, things like waterfowl, shearbirds, and shorebirds and seabirds. Lemmings, voles, as I mean, ground squirrels, rabbits, oyster catchers, wombles, and things like that. Willow and rock ptarmigan are also on their list as well. Crackling geese, they sometimes eat the babies. Just depends, they get the chance. They're very much, they seafood, they eat it. Though on wintering area grounds, they do prefer inland and do some coastal areas. They'll feed on water birds such as teal, the northern pintail, black rats, puffleheads, hares, deer mouse, and things like that. So muskrats as well. So pretty much just anything within that size range. I could go on for hours. There's actually quite a bit of information here. And they seem to not to worry too much about other species that are in their own kind of niche. They do share their prey with a number of predators like yagers and harriers and things like that. Arctic foxes as well. They specialize in hunting lemmings as well. And the young and eggs of snow owls can be taken by things like bears, wolverines, Arctic wolves, skulls, things like that. So they've got to be very careful with that. When they go to the south to winter outside of the Arctic, they often interact with things like eagle owls and great horned owls, which are actually related to, which is quite interesting. So that can be an issue, But they tend to, kind of dominate these interactions since they're slightly, despite their mindly smaller size, which is interesting. That's cool. In terms of breeding, they tend to be mostly monogamous, but there's also, some polygamy there. Lovely the cute little babies there. As well, they tend to, trying to look at nest sites. So most nest sites are typically in, low ground. They tend to have nests of about 50 centimeters and by length and width is about 44. Typically in open areas. The eggs are typically just white, and they have clutch size about up to about 15 to 16 years, but average about 7 to 9. They are quite good parents. The food is brought to the nest by males, and surplus food is stored nearby. Females in breeding season, they will have a brood pouch, and they kind of sit, which is an area of highly vascularized feathered skin on their belly that they use to warm the eggs. And she'll brood alone the young, while the male kind of brings food, which is interesting. It takes the hatching typically takes between 1 to 3 days, and they'll hatch about 37 to 45 hours apart. New chicks are called semi-altricial, so they, instead of being white, they are wet but dry at the end of the first day. The weight of 7 hatchlings is about 35 to 55 grams. And due to the pronounced asynchrony of the egg laying, the size difference between siblings can be enormous. Caches, as I mentioned, they'll cache the food, and they will eat each other sometimes as cannibalism. which is another very interesting little fact about them. At about 3 weeks of age, they tend to wander from their nest and usually stay within 500 meters. The first fledgling is about 35 to 50 days, and by 50 to 60 days they can hunt and fly on their own. The total care period is about 2 to 3.5 months, and that's kind of where they fly as well. And then sexual maturity is brought, the following year. They do have quite a long life for a bird. They've been known to live about 30 years, though their typical lifespan in the wild is probably about 10, which is quite cool. And one of the things that happen is collisions, things like that. But we'll talk about the conservation status as at the moment. So the species is quite dependent on lemmings and things like that, and also climate change will be a big thing for them. Depending on some areas, there's some low breeding populations in Europe, about 1,000 pairs, things like that. The Canadian population is estimated to be about 50 to 100,000 individuals. So they are considered, I believe, least concerned. Let me check. No, vulnerable. So they are considered vulnerable. So there is some issues there. I imagine, the same issues most birds of prey, poisoning, things like that. Also climate change with these guys, I can imagine. Yeah, that's believed to be an issue. They're considered vulnerable because of these declines. In terms of anthropogenic mortality and persecution, in terms of the deaths of some 438 banded ones, all that died, there was due to unknown causes. Some were shot, some were found dead or injured on highways, some collided with towers or wires, some were in animal traps. So things like that is also a big issue. They're also vulnerable to pesticides, which are used, of course, and sources of disturbance. That can things be like reindeer husbandry, dogs, photographers, tourism, things like that. It can be an issue. They're also quite a rare species and tend to not hang out with people. And also things like bioaccumulation, so a lot of the mercury poisoning, when they eat stuff or rodenticides, it accumulates in them in their bodies, and that's when it becomes fatal. Climate change is the big issue, as is pretty much widely perceived to be the biggest driver of their decline as temperatures rise. Increased rain and reduced snow affects the lemming populations, which in turn infect these owls. So it's actually believed to be the biggest decline is climate change, which is another big issue. But yeah, really, really cool animal. Do love a snowy owl. Definitely a cool little guy. So, and last but definitely not least of our little pack here, the Christmas pack, we've got a mammal finally. So we've started with a mammal, end with a mammal. We have got the hooded seal. So here's the male. So this is the hooded seal, also known as the bladder seal. Bladder-nose seal. These guys are large seal from the central and western North Atlantic. They range from Svalbard to the St. Lawrence. As you can see, they're kind of, silvery grey to white in colour with black spots that vary in size. The pups, as we'll talk, are known about as bluebacks because their coat is blue-grey on their back and they have a whitish belly, and they typically shed this coat after 14 months of age when they molt. The generic name of Cryptospora, which is a bladder bearer, because of the male's unusual ornament, which we'll get into, which is quite interesting. That's kind of where they get their name. Adults typically measure about 2.6 meters, or about 6 feet 6 inches, and then grow up to about 3.5 meters and about 300 to 410 kilograms. And they've got quite obvious sexual dimorphism, and females are much smaller. Females typically get about 6 feet, or about 2 meters, and about 300 kilograms at most, or 145 to 300 kilograms. And as I mentioned, their body's kind of silvery, things like that. And they also have this really interesting bladder, as we'll get into. So this bladder that the males have, they actually blows up to be red. So they got like a big sack, as we'll get into, which is interesting. In terms of distribution, as I mentioned, they're found in the Arctic Ocean and Northern Atlantic. They can be found from Labrador, all around that area, as far south as Alaska, as west as Alaska, and they can be found in the Canary Islands as well, which is quite cool. And in terms of their diet, they actually eat a lot of arthropods. They eat a lot of crustaceans, krill, and fish. So they eat capelin, cod, herring, and redfish. They're also been known to eat squid, sea stars, and mussels. And they actually, relative to other species, they consume 3 times the portions of redfish, which is interesting. In terms of their behaviour, they tend to feed in relatively deep waters of between 100 to 600 metres and dive for about 5 to 25 minutes. However, some dives can go deeper as 1,000 metres or longer than 25 minutes. And due to this rather continuous, about 90% of the time submerged during the day, dives during winter are also deeper and longer than those in the summer, and they're typically solitary except during the breeding and molting seasons. Through these 2 periods, they tend to fast as well, so the seals will mass annually and the demarch around July, where it's time for molting. They're also a relatively unsocial species compared to other seals, and typically more aggressive and territorial, and they demonstrate this using the hood, as we'll get into. So the thing that makes this seal very different from other seals is that hood. So they're known for this unusually elastic nasal cavity that's located on top of the head, which is known as the hood. And only males possess this nasal sac, and this begins to develop at the age of 4. This hood, there is an animation for it in the game, but I don't know how often we'll see it. I know I've seen like pictures of it, coming out, so it might be quite a rare animation, but I know it's a thing. So what will happen is that they begin to inflate the seal, and it'll as the seal makes initial breath prior to going to water, and then it begins to repeatedly deflate and inflate the seal as the seal swims. And the purpose of this is acoustic signaling. So this means it occurs when they feel threatened or warding off hostile species. They also serve to communicate their health and superior status to both males and females. And in sexually mature males, a pinkish balloon-like nasal membrane comes out of the left nostril, and to further aid in attracting mates. And this membrane, when shaken, produces various calls and sounds, whether the seal is underwater or on land. And most of these acoustic signals is used in acoustic situation, about 79%, while the rest are actually used for sexual purposes, to attract the mate. That's enough about the males. We will talk about the girls. We can't leave the girls out. So there are 4 major breeding areas for the hooded seal: the Gulf of St. Lawrence, Newfoundland, Dave Straits, and the West Ice near Germain. Male hooded seals are known to have several mates in a several mating season, where they're called polygamous. Well, some males will defend and mate with just one female for long periods of time. Others are more mobile and tend to mate with multiple females in a shorter period of time. And most males will reach sexual maturity about 5. Throughout all these areas, they tend to whelp around late March to early April and molt from June to August. The 4 recognised herds are generally sorted into 2 distinct populations: the northeastern Atlantic population and the western Atlantic population. It's estimated that the 90% of the total northwestern population give birth on the front, and the herd whelping period around January generally disperse into the sea after they breed in March. From April to June, after the breeding season, the species travel long distances to feed and then eventually gather together once again. Although some individuals return to the same area of ice in July to undergo molting, a majority of the herd, migrates molts further north. And after molting, the species disperse wildly, again to feed in late summer, and then return to the breeding areas late winter. So in terms of offspring, we'll talk about these cute little pups. How can you not love these cute little pups? Look really, really cute. So they are born at about 1 meter long and weigh about 24 kilograms. They are born in the ice from mid-March to early April and have a well-developed blubber and have to shed their prenatal coat. As I mentioned, they're called bluebacks because of the pale cream colour on their back, and they will not molt after 14 months. Nursing of this pup lasts only about 4 days, which is actually the shortest lactation of any mammal, so it only lasts 4 days, where the pup will double in size, gaining about 7 kilograms a day. This is possible because they drink the milk. The fat content of the milk is about 60%, and the female pup will mature at about 3 to 6 years, while males will mature between ages 5 and 7. So in terms of early development, actually researchers find that the pups differing needs in regards to sustaining work and foraging as compared to adults. Is that their cardiovascular, and cardiac systems and skeletal systems actually develop differently. Studies show that cardiac blood flow provides sufficient oxygen to support lymphatic pathways during diving, and their myoglobin levels is only about 20-30% adult levels, so it's just quite interesting. And hood seals shed their lungo fur in their womb, and they're born with a thick non-lungo fur coat, which is less efficient thermoregulating fur coat compared to other seals, like fur seals. But studies have shown that newborn hooded seals undergo a stage of afterbirth where the thickness of their blubber goes rapidly, which maximizes their ability to thermoregulate, so basically compensates for that. And it actually has advantages because the water cannot penetrate blubber like it does with fur, so it's actually a way, like in case, they fall in the water or something like that happens, they can recover better than other species of seal. And in terms of lifespan, they can live for about 30 to 35 years. And these guys are quite cute. Look at this little guy. How cute. He's pooping. I want to see you blow your hood. Come on. You'll do it for me? I don't think he's interested. There it is. There we are. See? That's the hood that I was on about. So he is blowing it. That's cool. I'll look at the male because he is blowing his hood. So prior to the 1940s, adult hooded seals were primarily hunted for leather and oil, though most recently they're typically caught in bycatch or subsistence hunting. Seal strainings are not considered to be a large threat to the seal population, but they're still highly researched. Seal pups are hunted for their blue and black pelts, and many mothers are killed in the process, attempting to protect their young. Hunting primarily occurs in Greenland, Canada, Russia, and Norway. Overall, their population is thought to be stable, increasing with the northeastern Atlantic population is declined between 85 to 90% in the last 60 years. So they are considered vulnerable, especially that population. The other one's, doing okay, but the northeastern one has actually declined quite a bit. It's also believed as well that scientific community that sonar is led to actually mass strandings. In multiple sonar tests on captive seals ranging from 1 to 7 hertz, it became evident they had little effect on the subjects, but it seemed like it didn't really matter to them. But conservation practices brought to the International Cooperation and Foundation of the Northwest Atlantic Fishing Organization led to increases as the Northwest population led to the hood seals increasing. And now it's required to hold a license to hunt hooded seals in international waters, and each license has a quota. And the total aboutable catches of hooded seals is set to about 10,000 annually. So because of people like Inuits and things like that require, they can't go grow food. They need to hunt these animals to live. There is allowance, to allow them. Animals like bowhead whales and seals and things like that. And polar bears. And they are, other than that, they're not typically hunted. And the hooded seal is protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972. So yeah, another really, really cool species. So it's really cool to cover so many interesting species today. I do love covering some oddities. So yeah, thank you Great Cakes Mod, who made every single mod. Really, really brilliant. Pumping it out through the season, into the new year and through Christmas. So really just been holding down the fort and, making sure we've got some good mods to talk about. So yeah, I think this will be a great place to end the video. So I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe. And bye-bye.